In this video, I'll be doing a brake servicing on my 2012 Nissan Pathfinder. I was having three problems. One was a light squeal while braking. The second one was a light grinding after you let off the brakes, indicating the pads were still touching the rotors. And the third issue was a clicking noise, which I attribute to one of the calipers engaging slightly slower than the other three, leading to a slight click when it engaged. For doing this, I'm using torque wrenches, socket set, a bunch of sockets, some wrenches, some Scotch-Brite, breaker bars, some gloves, jack stand, WD-40 brake cleaner, some coffee, and the main thing is a silicone-based lubricant. It's going to loosen up all the lug nuts on the vehicle. Once I got them loose, I'll jack up the vehicle and take off the lug nuts the rest of the way and remove the tire. I'm just doing the driver's side for this, but obviously they're symmetrical. Principally, you're going to need this 14 mil socket and a 17 mil open-ended wrench, and it fits together like that for taking off the bolt that is attached to the slider pin. In all cases, for the upper one, I'm just going to loosen the bolt. I'm not going to necessarily remove it, and that'll allow the brake to tilt up. I'm not sure I actually needed the 17 mil. More or less, I was able to get this bolt out of the slider pin without having to really go to the wrench very much, and I was able to tighten them without it as well, but you should have a 17 mil on hand. So like I said, I'm going to loosen the top one, and I'm going to remove the bottom one completely. So there's the bottom bolt, and that goes inside of the slider pin. Looks like that. With the top one loosened and the bottom one removed, it tilts up no problem. And you can see the two brake pads, and you can see the bottom slider pin. So I'll remove that because I'm going to clean it up. If you want, you could clean inside the boot. I don't do that, but it is possible. And then the upper one looks like that. So you can slide the whole thing out and clean it without removing it from the brake caliper itself. So on the brakes, there's this little clip called a drag reduction clip. I believe it is used to allow the pads to better disengage from the rotor. I only have one on each brake. I'm not sure if you need two on every brake. Probably. There's definitely a place to put two in, but in each instance I only have one. And the pads pull straight off the abutment clips, nothing too special, and they look like that. I was going to change these brake pads, but I think I'm just going to leave them for probably till next summer. And pull out the inside pad. Although the pads look symmetrical, I do put them back in the same place that they came from. So there's an abutment clip. I'm going to reuse them. You could purchase new abutment clips if you wanted to, but I'm just cleaning mine up. So for the slider pin, just a shop towel is all I'm using. You can see they're pretty dirty. Obviously, there's grease on them, but it's pretty black and grungy grease. And then I'm going to use the silicone-based brake lubricant to redo the lube. And like I said, you could clean inside of where the slider pin goes into on the brake caliper mounting bracket, but I didn't do that. I think it's fine the way it is. Give it the old in, out, and clean it up. You also need to make sure that that rubber boot seats itself properly on the slider pin. So the upper one, same deal, only I'm leaving the brake caliper in place. Wipe down the slider pin with the shop towel, and then take the silicone brake lubricant and paint it onto the slider pin. And you should also note that these slide pins are different, so there is a top and a bottom. If you were to remove it all the way, you should not get them confused, or you could have problems. Again, install it, give it the old in out, and then make sure that that rubber boot is seated properly. For the abutment clips, I'm just using brake cleaner, and then after hitting with the brake cleaner, I use a wire brush. They've got sort of a spring-loaded thing in there, which makes it a little bit tougher to clean, but overall, it's pretty simple. I don't necessarily remove all the abutment clips from the brake caliper mounting brackets. They are kind of a pain to take out and put back in. For the other ones, I actually just did them on the vehicle, but for demonstration purposes, there's the one I took off. And I put some brake lubricant on there as well. The one thing I would say, if you don't like the look of this orange stuff, you might not want to use it. There's probably something else you can get that isn't quite as obvious, because you can see the brakes through your rims. And if you don't like that orange look, or if you don't care, whatever, but you might want to get a black lubricant or a clear lubricant or something. You might have other options if you don't want to see the orange. I happen not to care. So for the brake pads themselves, same deal, spray them with some brake parts cleaner, and then take the shop towel, wipe off any excess dirt or grime that remained on there after the cleaning with the brake parts cleaner. That is obviously the inside brake pad. You can tell by the marks the brake pistons left on there. So for these ones with the back plate, I'm going to put 2 layers of the lubricant on. So spread it direct to the brake pad. Then I'll put the brake pad shim back on. There you can see a good shot of the 2 circles from the pistons. And then I'll add the lubricant to the back of the brake pad shim. I add some of the lubricant to where it's going to slide into the abutment clips. Although if you've already lubricated the abutment clips, it probably isn't necessary. Once that's done, just going to remount that brake pad right back where it came from. And that's the first one done. Fairly easy. Didn't get a good shot of me putting the pad in because my big head was in the way, but that's fine. And for the outer pad, very much the same deal. Hit it with the brake parts cleaner. Remove the brake pad shim. Give it a good hosing with the brake parts cleaner. Take the shop towel and wipe it down. Let it dry off for a second. Clean up the shim. Add some lubricant to the back of the brake pad. Put the shim back on. Then add some more lubricant to the back of the shim. And install the brake pad back into the abutment clips. So that's the pads done for the front. I am going to clean up the caliper a little bit. For this, I'm just spraying some brake cleaner onto the shop towel, and then I'll wipe the pistons down and then clean up the brake caliper a little bit. Just making sure that we don't get a whole bunch of dirt pushed back into the rubber boots on these brake pistons. And then I'll take some more of this brake parts lubricant, get the pistons a little bit. Obviously not too much contact surface, but I'll lubricate them up, and then I'll get the sort of the wings. I'm sure there's a technical term for that, but the wings of the brake calipers here. So any part that contacts anything or slides on anything now has some of this brake lubricant on it. And then I'll just carefully lower the brake caliper. Although I did screw up and forget to put the drag reduction clip in, so I had to take it back off, put the clip on. There you go. So obviously I saw that when I had some bonus parts laying on the ground. So reinstall the bolts into the slider pins, tighten everything up, and for this is probably where you're going to more likely need that 17 mil open-ended wrench and a torque wrench. Before I go to the torque wrench, I'll just use a regular ratchet and tighten them up. And for the torque specification I have for my Haynes manual is 20 foot-pounds for all of them. So it doesn't matter which bolt, and it doesn't matter if it's in the front or the rear, they're quoting 20 foot-pounds. So that's what I went with. And that is pretty much that for the front brake. So rear brakes they look different, but the process isn't necessarily different. I'm going to loosen the upper bolt. Again, didn't really need the wrench there to do that. Then completely remove the lower bolt so I can swing the brake caliper up. And again, you can see I don't really need the wrench on there to remove the bolt. Once the lower bolt's off, swing the caliper up, or if you want, do as I did there and just completely remove it. And there's lots of space for you to set the brake caliper safely somewhere on the vehicle without it hanging from the brake lines. I'll remove the brake pads. You can see I'm running Bosch. I did spray some brake part cleaner on the abutment clips before doing anything. So that's why everything looks a little bit wet. I'll remove the lower slider pin, just like the front, give it a good wipe down, and then I'll take some of the brake part lubricant and lube it up. And as already mentioned, you could clean up inside that rubber boot if you wanted to. I didn't feel the need to do it. Put the slider pin back in and make sure that it clips into the rubber boot. And then I'll do the exact same thing with the upper slide pin. And you can see that they do look different. So if you do remove them both, just keep in mind there is an upper and lower and you need to keep track of that. So I'll put that in later. So you can see these are Bosch pads. I would say whoever installed them did not put any lubricant on them when they were installed initially. So I'll hose them down with some brake parts cleaner, add some of the brake pad lubricant to the back of the brake pad, put the shim back on, and then add some of the lubricant to the back of the shim, as well as some lubricant to the surfaces that are going to have a little bit of friction. So you see I put the lubricant on the brake pad instead of the abutment clips in this example. This one was a little bit tougher to get in there, so I actually ended up wiping a lot of the lubricant off, and I go back and put that on afterwards. So I didn't show the inner pad getting clean, but I think you get the point now. And again, I put some of the lubricant on the piston as well as on the two wings of the brake caliper. And just like the lower slide pin, you do want to make sure that that upper slide pin boot is properly seated on the slide pin, just like on the front of the vehicle. Tighten the bolts that go into the slide pins. Once again, 20 foot-pounds, doesn't matter if it's front or back, according to the manual I have on this. Torque them down, and that's pretty much it. If you're working efficiently, I would say this would take about 30 minutes a wheel. And then I'm torquing all the lug nuts down to 100 foot-pounds. Pretty easy job, fairly fast as well. You don't really need too much for tools. It did make a big difference. This vehicle has a tendency to be a very noisy braking vehicle. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.